is Ayca Cubukcu. I'm an assistant professor in human rights at the London School of Economics, and I'll be chairing the event tonight. The name of the event is Experience of Women in Contemporary Turkey, and it's hosted by MP George Howarth, who's sitting here with us. He'll say a few words to open the event. We have 3 speakers tonight. I will introduce them in the order of their speech. Professor Binnaz Toprak, Dr. Funda Ustek, and Ms. Arwa Ibrahim will be speaking in that order. Would you like to say a few words first?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I welcome everybody to Portcullis House in the House of Commons, the most modern building in the otherwise crumbling edifice that is the House of Commons as portrayed in the, I don't know if anybody saw the Michael Cockerell documentary. I wanted to be associated with this event for 3 reasons tonight. The first is that, quite unusually in this Parliament, anyway, I have been a long-standing supporter of the principle of Turkish accession to the European Union. I think that would be good for the United Kingdom, and I know there's some barriers in the way at the moment, which I hope can be overcome, but it certainly would be good for the United Kingdom, it would be good in the long run for Turkey, and it would be good for Europe and the Middle East as well. Secondly, as a minister in the Blair government, I'm partly responsible for incorporating the European Convention on Human Rights into our own domestic legislation. And I'm very proud of that, and I believe that universal rights should be exactly that. They should apply in all places and at all times, and in conformity with all of the UN requirements and the European Union requirements. And I think it's very, very important. And finally, I should say that, and it's a worldwide phenomenon, this, and it's a fight that has to be fought, and it's a fight that has to be won. The equality in politics for women, whether it's in legislative assemblies or whether it's in political parties, is still a battle to be won. And where, you know, I can remember the struggles in my own party to create a situation where we could get more women Labour MPs. And it isn't easy. There are a lot of prejudices that you have to fight with and ultimately defeat in order to do it. But my experience is I was elected, I was very young at the time, in 1986 in a by-election, in a parliament that scarcely had any women in it at all. And on big occasions, the women were expected to wear, like the Queen's speech or the budget, were expected to wear a hat and a really posh outfit, as though in some way that was their place in this assembly, in this event, to look decorative. And if you look at the House of Commons now, there are a lot more women in it, but still not enough. You know, it's only around a quarter, and we need at least 50% of the House of Commons to be women. But you know, finally, and I'll finish on this, and it's really a thing for men to understand, women already do understand it, and that is, if you want something that's normal, if you want something that feels like the rest of society, any institution, then it needs to be more feminised. There needs to be women's voices, there needs to be women's concerns, but also it needs to be a different way of doing things. Often when, you know, women get involved in something, the way we do things is better, because sometimes, you know, male institutions develop ways of doing things that frankly aren't always the best. And I'll finish on this note. With apologies, by the way, I won't be able to stay for the entire event. But I remember when I was a minister in the Blair government, trying to argue the case for more women in the fire service. And when you would think that was a fairly straightforward argument to have. A woman wants to be a firefighter and she's got all the necessary qualifications. Why would, well, you wouldn't believe the trade unions were against it, the civil servants were against it. And I said, well, what's the problem? And they said, well, they're not strong enough. And so I said, well, how do they have to prove that they're strong enough to be a firefighter? They have this test. And I must say that, when I looked into this test, you would have had to be superhuman strong. Most blokes wouldn't even begin to be able to carry out the test that was necessary. But what they did is set the bar so high, almost to exclude women. And I had to start off with a review of why this test, this physical test, had to be so severe. And eventually, they came back and said, well, actually, it doesn't need to be that severe. We could do this, or we could do that, we could do it in a slightly different way. And the result of that, if you look around the fire service, there still aren't enough women in it. But there are a lot more women in it than there were in 1997. And it's by breaking down those barriers that are sometimes artificially set that you win the battle. So I'll leave you with the one comment that, the fight you're fighting is a good one. You have my support, but more importantly, you have to win that support, the support of all the institutions concerned. It's not easy, but it can be done. Thank you.
Before we proceed, thank you very much for this speech. I should remind everyone that the co-organizers of this event are Center for Turkish Studies, as you can see in the posters, and SOAS Turkish Society. I believe many students from SOAS are here. So our first speaker tonight will be Professor Binnaz Toprak. She'll be familiar to many of you, but let me try to give you a brief biography. Professor Binnaz Toprak is a member of Turkish Parliament and Vice Chair of Commission on Equal Opportunities for Women and Men. In 1976, she joined the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul, where she taught for many years until 2008. Afterwards, Professor Toprak served as a professor and chair of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at Bahçeşehir University. In June 2011, she was elected as a representative from Istanbul to the Grand National Assembly of Turkey. So, before further ado, Professor Toprak.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Center for Turkish Studies and SOAS Turkish Society for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad that there are men around. Usually in Turkey, when there's a conference, a symposium like this, or a conference like this about women, generally the public is just women. Men, for whatever reason, are not interested. I'm especially happy that there are young men around who are interested in the topic. I'll start with an episode from the 1930s, and then some data from 2014. The episode has to do with my mother. I like this story very much. I generally tell this story when I'm abroad to foreign audiences. I don't know how many of you are British. But my mother was born in 1908 into the Ottoman Empire. That was the year of the second constitutional period in the Ottoman Empire, and the empire was modernizing. There were already schools for girls, and she went to one of these in Istanbul, and by the time she was of university age, the Republic had come, and she went to the prestigious law faculty of Istanbul University, graduated in 1929, and in early 1930s, she was appointed as a judge in criminal court. Now, if she had been here in my place, let's say in 1931, facing an audience like this and introduced herself as a Turkish judge, in criminal court, people would probably have looked at her as if she came from outer space. I mean, there was no such creature in the whole world. Definitely not here in Britain or US or anywhere else in Europe, and she wasn't alone. There were lots of women at the time who were judges and various other professions. Now 2014, I mean, given this background, given the fact that the Republic was really exemplary in many ways in terms of reforms about women, and definitely exemplary in the whole Muslim geography, look at the data now. 2014 Human Development Report of UNDP, which has a gender equality index. Turkey scores 69 among 187 countries. I mean, dismal, really, given the fact that it started so early. In the Turkish parliament, where I am now, right behind the speaker, there's this big sign that reads, sovereignty belongs to the nation. I once wrote an article in the newspaper saying that that sign should change and it should read, sovereignty belongs to men, because it's really men that govern Turkey. When you look at statistics, it's striking. For example, the percent of, you were talking about women in parliament, percent of women in the present Turkish parliament is 14.3%. As we were talking with my friend here, I mean, some of the Muslim countries in the Middle East have higher percentages, for example. There's only one woman cabinet minister, and she's the minister responsible for family and social welfare. I mean, even the name suggests how the state or this government looks at women, family, and social welfare. Feminist groups have been arguing that, you know, this ministry should be called Equality Ministry or Women's Ministry, but to no avail. And as I will talk later on, part of the problem is that this government looks at women not as individuals, not as citizens with rights, but as members of a family. That's the whole conception of women, and this is part of the reason why we have so many problems. You look at municipal government, there are 3 mayors out of 30 metropolitan city mayors. 37 mayors out of 1,351 townships. That's 2.7%. Out of over 20,000 members of municipal parliaments, there are only over 2,000 women, about 10%. Permanent undersecretaries in ministries, 1 out of 25. Governors, 2 out of 21. High-level judges at the Constitutional Court, none. In other top judicial boards, 1 out of 7. Top-level bureaucrats, 663 out of over 8,000, so that's about 8%. Chairs of various professional organizations, business organizations and other organizations of engineers and architects and doctors and so on, 1 out of 14 of these professional organizations. Chairs of political party organizations, 6 out of 81. The only exception is the HDP, the Kurdish party, because it has co-chairs, so that there, in the Kurdish party, there are 67 women co-chairs out of 67, but that's the only exception. Employment, and she'll be talking about this, female employment is 27%. EU average is 59%. Male employment is 65% compared to the 27% of women. Illiteracy, there have been in recent years great attempts to get rid of illiteracy, so it has improved. It used to be worse, but still there are gaps between males and females. 2% for males, 9% for females. Population was secondary education, males 60%, females 37%. With university education, males 15%, females 11%. So they're all, you know, this is a dismal picture. There are only two areas where the status of women is more or less pretty good. The first is academia. It's probably, percent of women in academia is probably the highest in all of EU. Right now, there are 29% of the professors, all professors are women, associate professors 34%, assistant professors 38%, overall I think it's over 40%, considering assistants and other academic jobs. Judges, that's also pretty good, 37%. But in both academia and judiciary, and in other areas as well, nevertheless, there's this glass ceiling. As I just said, in the judiciary, for example, at top levels, you don't see any women. You do find women judges, but not as judges of the Constitutional Court, of these various other top-level courts. And the same is true of academia in terms of university rectors, in terms of deans and so on. So, you know, that glass ceiling business where we would hit this unseen ceiling is there. So all of this adds up to a bleak picture, especially when you, like I said, consider the fact that Turkey started so early in giving rights to women. Now, who to blame? I would say that all the previous governments, I mean, I wouldn't be partisan and argue that it's only AKP, the present Islamist government, that's to blame, but all the past governments, and of course this present government as well, including actually past women's organizations. I mean, it's a long story and I can't talk about all that in 15 minutes, but women's organizations until the 1980s were content with the idea that the Republic had given all the rights to women and that there was nothing else to do. In the 60s and the 70s, women's organizations were involved in the leftist movement with the notion that if socialism came, women would be liberated. When you got rid of class distinctions, even though obviously we now know that that's not at all the case, and it wasn't at all the case in ex-socialist countries. So it's only after 1980 that feminist groups really began to emerge and become quite powerful. The women's NGOs, I think, are the most powerful today in Turkey among all the other NGOs. So when you look at this data, it's no surprise that women's status in present Turkey leads to this low status leads to a number of problems, and obviously the most important one is violence against women. This has increased incredibly in recent years. In the last 7 years, 1,400%. This includes all kinds of violence, but including murders. Murders alone, in the last January alone, 27 women were murdered. In February, 21. And in general, 1, 2, 3, if you look at daily newspapers, you'll, in every day, there's at least 2, 3 women who will be killed by members of their family. This is why I'm saying that this is this notion of looking at women as members of a family are problematic. I said this in commissions in the parliament several times. I said, look, you're trying to promote the family, and you look at women as members of a family, but that's the root of the problem, because it's these family members who are killing these women. It's not strangers on the street, unlike some other countries where women might be attacked. In the US, for example, I know that streets in big cities are dangerous, but in Turkey that doesn't happen. It's not strange men who kill or attack these women. It's husbands, ex-husbands, fiancés, ex-fiancés, brothers, uncles, fathers, you know, you name it. It's all these members of family, and generally when you look at the reason for it, it's something called honor, family honor, that the women in one way or another sort of violated the rules of what's proper behavior and the concept of family honor. Now this business, this violence has really reached incredible proportions. I mean, it's almost surrealist proportions. A few years ago, for example, this man, 3 a.m. in the morning, his wife is sleeping right next to him. He dreams that she's having an affair with somebody else. He gets up, goes to the kitchen, finds a knife and kills her in bed, simply because he dreamt that she was having sex with a foreign man. It's just incredible, and you hear these ridiculous, surreal stories about these. Now, to be fair, the present government, AKP government, is trying to do something about it because they're under pressure constantly and under criticism that violence against women is increasing. In 2011, Turkey was the first signatory to Council of Europe's Istanbul Convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. And it went into effect this year. Then in 2012,